lesson, we talked about Tertullian the man, Tertullian the person. In this lecture, we want to talk about Tertullian in action through some of his writings. And I've called this Tertullian Against Philosophy, Apologetics and Heretics. And what I want to talk about here are ways in which we see Tertullian's suspicion of philosophy. That is, his suspicion of the idea that philosophy can get you to ultimate truth. I want to see how that plays out in his apologetical works, and his writing against heretics. So, general statement, Tertullian did not trust philosophy in the sense that he did not trust philosophy as the highest good. He did not believe that philosophy could get you to ultimate truth. In the world today, there are still people who try to find their ultimate truth through some kind of philosophical system. Tertullian said you can't do this. Philosophy, if it's your ultimate truth, you're misled, you're misguided. And this is because of the corruption of human reason. Human reason it's corrupted, it's limited. How can a person claim to speak about the eternal things of God, about a God who is bigger than human understanding? How can a human being claim to reason to have a full understanding of God? You can't do it, Tertullian said. And those who try to use philosophy to give you ultimate truth are misled. Therefore, if you want to get to God, you have to go through the church. You cannot get to God directly from philosophy. You can't go through reasoning and philosophical speculations to try to get to God. If you want to understand God, if you want to have a relationship with God, if you want to reach God and understand God, you must go through the church. Because the church has access to truths that are higher than any philosophy. One of Tertullian's most famous statements is this quotation: "What does Athens have to do with Jerusalem?" Athens was the famous center of ancient Greek philosophy. Jerusalem obviously being the starting point of Christianity, the place where Jesus died and rose again from the dead. What does the center of Greek philosophy have to do with the center of our faith? What agreement is there between the academy and the church? And I have academy here capitalized because Tertullian is thinking specifically about the academy. The academy, this is not a general reference to, say, for example, the academic, like colleges and universities as the academy. The academy with a capital A was a school of thought that was founded by Plato in Rome. Plato's particular house of philosophy in Athens was called the academy. So Tertullian is saying, what kind of agreement is there between Plato's philosophical academy and the church? What does Athens have to do with Jerusalem? How does the center of human philosophy, how does that relate to the center of Christianity? Obviously, his answer is, what does Athens have to do with Jerusalem? His answer is nothing. What agreement is there between the academy and the church? He would say nothing. At least if you're trying to put the academy as the greatest good. And his suspicion about philosophy shows up in a number of his works, and we're going to look at a few examples. So one of these is his apology, Tertullian's apology. This is not an apology as in you bump into someone and you say, "Excuse me." No, this is an apology as in an explanation. An explanation for something, to try to show why it's reasonable. Apologetics is a contemporary study of trying to explain Christianity to non-Christians. Plato wrote an apology. Tertullian is writing an apology explaining Christianity. Now, it's possible that he writes his apology after the death of Irenaeus. And I put here martyrdom in with a question mark after it. The traditions about how Irenaeus dies are a little bit unclear, but one of the traditions says that Irenaeus died as a martyr. And if he did, then Tertullian certainly would have respected him for that. Tertullian already loved Irenaeus. He loved Irenaeus' work. He valued Irenaeus' works. He thought Irenaeus had some very important things to say. And on all those fronts, I agree with him. Irenaeus did have a lot of very important things to say. So possibly after the death of Irenaeus, if Irenaeus died as a martyr, Tertullian felt the need to write something to explain Christianity. Let's talk about a few of the ideas that come across through his apology. One is, why? Why is Jerusalem greater than Athens? Why is the church greater than the academy? Well, the church is older in some ways. The worship of God is older than philosophy. So he's making an argument here that what is older is better. And Tertullian, remember, is living in the Roman Empire. And a few lessons ago, we talked about the fact that initially the Romans leave Jews alone to worship as they want because the Romans honored Jewish tradition because it was old. Romans honor things that are old. Older is better. In our context, we usually think that newer is better. The newer thing is better. But in the ancient Roman context, what was old was typically better. So Tertullian says, here's one argument against philosophy. Philosophy is new. Compared to the worship of the one true God, philosophy is new. And he says, look at your system. Look at your mythological system with all these gods and goddesses. Even the philosophers who are already tainted and corrupt in their thinking, even these tainted, corrupt, inferior thinkers, look at your myths, look at your religion and make fun of it. You have these stories about gods and goddesses and the god Zeus changing into a swan to come down and this and that. He says, even the philosophers make fun of this. How foolish is your religion? How foolish is your religion if even the corrupt philosophers know it's foolish? It's very foolish. This is not the kind of apologetics where Tertullian is seeking to make a lot of friends. This is a more aggressive type of apologetics. Your way of thinking, your religious system is so irrational that even the inferior philosophers see there's a problem with it. And greater than those philosophers, of course, is the worship of the one true God. He goes on, and he says, another thing about your system is it's not even logical. Polytheism doesn't make sense. Tertullian was a very organized thinker, and in some ways a very linear thinker. So he said, if polytheism makes sense, then why are there so many different gods and goddesses for the same thing? And why do some of the gods and goddesses seem to both be the gods and goddesses of the same thing? How does that work? How can you have two different gods of the same thing? Or two different goddesses of the same thing? And if all these gods and goddesses are true, if the Greek gods and goddesses are true, then what about the Egyptian gods and goddesses? Where do they come from? So polytheism makes no sense. Now, for Romans, monotheism makes no sense. For a Roman audience, they would say, you only worship one God? This is one of the criticisms of Jews and Christians. You only worship one God? Romans thought everyone knows that there are lots of gods and goddesses. But Tertullian flips it and says, no, actually that system doesn't make any sense. It makes more sense that there's one true God who oversees everything than that you have all these little gods and goddesses who always fight with each other anyway, who don't even get along. There's a moral argument here. Tertullian says, if you want proof that the Christian way of life is superior, look at how Christians live versus how non-Christians live. Christians are moral. They're honest. And this approach to apologetics goes back to Minucius Felix, who makes a similar argument. And Minucius Felix is dealing with, you hear that we kill babies and we drink their blood. No. Let me tell you what's true. This is how we really live. Tertullian is saying, if you want to know if Christianity is valid, if you want to know if Christianity is logical, look at how people live as a result of Christianity. He makes an historical argument. Good emperors, like Trajan, do not seek out Christians. A few lessons ago, we talked about the letters between Pliny, a governor in the Black Sea region, and Trajan. And Trajan tells Pliny, don't go on a witch hunt. Don't go out there seeking Christians. Don't believe everyone who says, well, that person's a Christian. No. Be restrained. be restrained. Tertullian says that's a good emperor. A good emperor does not go out looking to kill Christians. A good emperor is restrained. But bad emperors do this. Emperors like Nero, whom basically everyone in the Roman world hated. Even the Roman historians don't like Nero. Everyone was afraid of him. He was crazy. He was a lunatic. He was a monster. So Tertullian is saying this: if you are a person who criticizes Christianity, you're like Nero. However, if you're a person who holds back judgment and doesn't believe crazy stories that you hear and really thinks about it before you make a decision, you're like Trajan. So, audience members, hearers of this apology, who do you want to be like? Do you want to be like Trajan, or do you want to be like Nero? Put in those terms, the reader is obviously going to say, I want to be like Trajan. So Tertullian is moving them in a certain direction. And Tertullian also says Christians form a function for the Roman Empire. The Roman Empire doesn't have to put up with Christians as if, no, the Roman Empire needs Christians. Because he says the Christians pray for the empire. They pray for Rome. And because they pray for Rome, God allows the Roman Empire to continue. And God allows the Roman Empire to continue to give more people time to come to the knowledge of the truth. Tertullian doesn't state this explicitly, but he implicitly suggests that if the empire falls, the end of the world could come. He doesn't say that per se, but he's hinting at it. He's saying Christians are good for the Roman Empire. Because if Christians pull back from the Roman Empire, guess what? All of the promises of wrath in the Bible are going to be unleashed. So if you're a Roman, you want Christians in the empire. You want them praying to God. You want them praying for the emperor. Because if the Christians pull out, God's wrath is going to fall. So beginning with this idea of the irrationality of philosophy or distrust of philosophy, Tertullian attempts to build this argument that really the rational, logical way to live is as a Christian, not to follow philosophy. But the dangers of philosophy for Tertullian are not only out there. For him, the dangers of philosophy have also been within Christianity itself. And we see this in a work called The Prescription Against the Heretics. Prescription Against the Heretics. On my flight over, I caught a little bit of something in my head on the plane. I went to see the doctor to get a prescription. Tertullian says, here's a prescription against heresies. But the first thing he does, like any doctor is, he gives a diagnosis, and he explains how this might have happened. So Tertullian's going to talk about philosophy and how philosophy is actually responsible for many heresies in the church.
Do you know the Latin name for that?
Do I know the Latin name? It's the, I think it's the Prescriptio Omnium Hereticorum.
This is the one, slight confusion because there's the pseudo.
There's the pseudo one, yes.
Which this is not.
No.
No.
Okay, he says, one of his points is that heresy is an innovation. Heresy is something that's new. And we've mentioned this before, I'll mention it again, that in Christian history, until really the most recent modern years, what was new was always suspicious. What was new, innovations were always bad. Because the idea was the original faith was good, anything you change from the faith was bad. Tertullian says heresy is innovation. Heresy is people making up new things. And they're using philosophy. They're using philosophy and their own curiosity. And by using philosophy and their own curiosity, they begin to make up ideas and come up with ideas that are heretical. And then he says they proof text. They pick out little verses from the Bible to try to prove their own assumptions. They have an idea about this, and if you look hard enough, you can find some verse in the Bible that might sound like it agrees with what you're saying. So Tertullian says heretics, they tend to have a philosophical idea of their own reasoning, And then they try to find verses in the Bible to agree with them. One particular group that he thought was guilty was the Gnostics. The Gnostics had mixed philosophy, Greek philosophy, with Christianity, and they'd come up with a heresy, something that was not the true faith. And one of the particular elements that bothers him is their rejection of martyrdom. We've talked before about Tertullian's dedication to martyrdom, his emphasis on it. He writes a work about it. The Gnostics reject martyrdom because they use philosophy to come up with a different kind of Christianity. And their different kind of Christianity says, well, dying for the faith is not the most important thing. Tertullian says they get there by using philosophy, and it leads them astray. So their ideas are wrong, and then their practices are wrong. So to summarize this lecture, I would say it this way. For Tertullian, human wisdom and speculation could never lead to ultimate truth. It's not that Tertullian thinks logic is bad. In his apology, he's trying to make a logical argument. But logic and wisdom and speculation can never lead you to the ultimate truth. I meet people sometimes who hear what I do for a living, and then they ask me questions that they think are really going to throw me off. They ask me questions like, well, so if God can do anything, can God make a rock that's big enough that God can't lift it? And I think that's just a stupid question, right? It's a dumb question. But Tertullian says, by using human wisdom and speculation, you come to asking dumb questions. Or you come to dumb answers, or heretical answers. Or you mix a little bit of Christianity with a little bit of this and a little bit of that. It's not a new problem. And if we read Paul's letters, we see even in Paul's day, some of his letters, particularly to the Colossians, he's dealing with people who seem to be mixing elements of Christianity with some speculation, some Greek philosophy. And Paul says, you need to be careful about this. Don't follow that track. And in Tertullian's day, this is still an issue. So questions about this element of Tertullian, how his approach to philosophy impacts his apologetic writing and also his writing in terms of heresies and his concern about the purity of the church.